welcome to the StoryArc podcast, the place where we unravel the secrets of storytelling in order to become better professionals and better human beings. My name is Glod, and I'll be your host for this podcast. We are in dire need of new and inclusive narratives. The old narratives have had the tendency of pushing people away and not including a huge part of the population. And there is also the fact that some of the narratives that circulate in our companies and in our organizations, in our communities, in our countries, also tend to not include very real and important aspects of the human experience. There is one story that has been perpetrated for many years, if we're talking millennia and centuries, decades, and yet have always remained silent and has been something that systematically has been tried to be pushed under the rug. And that is the untold story of people dealing with trauma. Trauma comes in many shapes and forms. We can go from childhood trauma, the experience of feeling neglected or abused by a loved one or a tutor, somebody that is supposed to care about you. So here we go from psychological abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, as well as sexual abuse. And unfortunately, when we look at the statistics around this phenomenon, it is quite disheartening. One statistic from the European Union and their official statistics were saying that in the EU, we were talking about close to 20% of the population having had experienced at least one episode of childhood abuse in their lifetime. Now, that's one important sector. And another sector are people experiencing trauma from very tragic life events when it comes to losing a loved one or facing the divorce of your parents as a child, all the way to veterans of war, people that have been sent out into the battlefield and have not returned the same since that experience. And the stories of these people has always been somehow missing in our general narratives and in the way we speak about the human experience. Most often, people in these categories have a hard time feeling like they belong in this world. And for myself, as a person that has experienced childhood abuse on several occasions, as in both verbal and physical abuse in schools, in the streets, and also being exposed to sexual abuse as a teenager, this has put me in a perspective where I had a hard time dealing with the world. And the big burden of trauma isn't the trauma itself as much as it is living with it in a world where you feel this does not belong. One of the tragedies for most people dealing with trauma is that they have no one to go to at first. For example, when we think about people that have experienced rape, most of the times there is a tendency to not talk about it. Most women have a fear of talking about something like that because we have a narrative in which we say, we sometimes vilify the victim of such an experience by saying, "Oh, but you were dressed provocatively," or "but you didn't say no," or "you should have stood up to that person." And then what happens is that the victim tends to be judged. And we feel in that moment, whenever we're put on the spot like that, that we brought that on us, that we were the ones responsible for it. And that is a narrative that puts a great deal of strain on our psyche, right? It took me about 10 to 12 years to finally open up and to share that experience with someone else. And it wasn't just a matter of the time. It actually, what it took is to form those healthy, authentic relationships in which I felt safe enough to share that with someone else. And this is an important factor, is that because we miss out on these very fine little details, people that have not experienced trauma in any way can be very loose in terms of their relationship. They don't really care about creating very strong bonds because to a certain extent they can live life very normally without having to create those authentic bonds. But for us, it is very crucial that we create bonds based on trust, where we know the other person, if we share something with them, they will trust us, they won't judge us in any way, and they will meet us with empathy and compassion. And when we are all raised in this culture, very manly culture of, man up, don't show your emotions, be strong, it's very hard for you to open up to all of your male friends. And then at the same time, if, for example, having experienced sexual abuse, then you have a hard time approaching the opposite sex. And then you have a hard time finding the right people to reach out to. Then, not to mention therapy, when everybody will think of you that you are crazy, you are a nut job for going to see a therapist, you require medication, there's something, you have a big disorder in your head. And what also doesn't help is that then you have the personal development movement, which kind of just gives very simple solutions. And for people who haven't had an experience like that, there are some very credible solutions there to facing certain challenges in life. But then what it also did is that it created all of a sudden theoreticians on these matter. And so if you open up about a subject like this, then people say, oh, it's in your head. Oh, you can do better. Oh, come on. And we kind of touched on that a little bit in our previous episode. But beyond this, because then you might be saying, okay, man, look, it's just what people believe. It's just people's thoughts. But you can push for that. You can challenge people and you can tell your story, and that will make me change the way they think, which is true. Doing that has changed the way people have thought about experiences like these. To a certain extent, with all of my friends and all of my colleagues, as I've opened up about it, I've, one way or the other, opened their minds and opened their perspective to the fact that, hey, there are people like that among us. If we go by that simple statistic that we found for the European Union of up to 20% of someone who has experienced at least one episode of childhood abuse, that means 1 out of 5 people has dealt with something like that. But if you ask me, I believe to a certain extent we've all experienced trauma in our lives one way or the other. And the thing is, trauma is incredibly subtle. Sometimes, yes, it can be a huge, big thing, knowing that you have been raped. There was a big event that has shook you to the core. But sometimes it can be something so subtle. Because trauma, usually, the one that is the most complicated to fix, so to say, or to heal, is the one that happened in a relationship. So, for example, if the perpetrator, the abuser, was a family member, somebody you trusted, or a father figure, so to say, if you're talking about a priest, if you're talking about a teacher, that will put you in a very, very scary situation where you have later in life have to create new bonds. And for example, if you had teachers that used to beat you in school, because, for example, that's what happened in Romania in the 90s. It was quite common for teachers to beat you. Even parents would be very happy. They would say, look, I'm going to send my child to this teacher because I know this teacher will put him straight. And just that experience alone will make you have a hard time trusting in people related with authority, right? So if you have an authority figure, your manager, your CEO of the company, the president of your country and stuff and so on, you will always be having a hard time creating a relationship based on trust. You will always be doubtful. And then the worst part is that the same thing will happen in romantic relationships. You will have a hard time opening up to that person, fully communicating what is it that you feel. And then, therefore, there can be a long, plethora of failed relationships after failed relationships, or worse, it can be one big failed relationship where you form a family and then all of the things from that experience come back to haunt us. Trauma its real price really comes after it. Because when you look at also the experience of most people dealing with trauma, a lot of them are going to maybe experience addiction at a higher rate than regular people. There is a saying that not all traumatized people become addicted, but most addicted people have a traumatic experience that has led them down this path. Then they're also most likely to have a hard time keeping a stable job. They are also having a hard time creating social bonds and forming relationships. And that's because we have a hard time understanding what they went through. And let me give you an example of an historical mistreatment of people dealing with trauma in even Western societies, right? So during the First World War, there was the more and more discussion of a phenomenon of the veterans, the people coming back from war, and that was the concept of shell shock. They would come back from the battlefields with no vision. It's as if they were stuck somewhere in time. They wouldn't move, or they would just be shaking and having a gruesome reliving of what they've experienced on the battlefield. Now, the British government couldn't afford losing morale. It was important for this story to move on, of bravery, of marching on to the battlefield with courage. And so, at one point, they actually had an official statement to ban all publishing of reports having to do with shell shock, and all doctors were banned from the possibility of diagnosing somebody with shell shock. Actually, they gave up a different type of diagnosis. It was called not yet diagnosed nervous. And this is something that also happened later on when we had, in the Second World War, the rise of the Nazi regime in Germany. In the same way, there could be no discussion about the horrific experiences of what happened on the battlefield. There is one book, unfortunately I can't remember the title, but I will mention it hopefully later. There is one book that became an international bestseller, I think is All Is Well on the Western Front, or something around those lines, which became a bestseller because it actually talked about these experiences in the battlefield, where, you know, the shell shock and all of that tragedy. And when the Nazi regime came to Germany, that was one of the books that was burned right away in the square of Berlin, because that was something that did not fit with their narrative. And most of the times, whenever people were talked about in sense of coming from war with this experience of shell shock and trauma, it wasn't a problem of war, it was a problem of their character. It was always characterized as if, no, it's not you, it's not the fact that war is inhumane and damaging to your mind and to your whole life. It's the fact that you don't have the character to face up to it. And this was perpetrated again in Second World War, both in Nazi Germany and in the Allied forces. And many, many veterans have suffered a great deal because they were not given the compensation and the treatment necessary to survive after that. If you, as a country, do not value those people, and you do not give them the support for their traumatic experience, what chances do people have the people that haven't even had to do this for the sake of that country, right? You know, you were abused by some stranger. It's not like you could say that, well, if the person that went out to protect the country doesn't receive the support that he requires, what chances do I have to be heard, to be taken seriously in this society? And you might be thinking to yourself, oh, come on, Alex, that was the Second World War. That does not happen today. Well, quite recently, I was scrolling for YouTube, and at one point, a few years ago, there was a video about two veterans of war meeting. One that was a recent veteran and one from the Second World War. And there was, in those, after that, their sharing of experiences of what they've gone through, there were a lot of comments on that video of people saying, oh, well, if you can't handle seeing death, with your own eyes, then you're not good for war. And there were a lot of trolls. And that young soldier, that young veteran, he did another video where he responded to all of those negative comments. And that's the thing, even though we have gone a long way since then, we still, to a certain extent, fetishize war. We believe war is the masculine expression of humanity. Let's go to war, let's fight the enemy and stuff like that. Now, we might have a tendency to fall for such narratives because we are tribal creatures and we want to protect and take care of each other. But right now, we're not talking about that. It's the vilifying also of the fragility that we all have. None of us are made of stone. None of us are perfect creatures that will face any challenge head on. Look at how difficult it is for us to adapt as a society to a pandemic, and how fragile some people are when it comes to just wearing a goddamn mask in a closed space. And they feel like, oh my God, what is this? Why am I so deranged, right? We have a hard time adapting to change, and it comes from something like this because we are always told that we have to be perfect. We have to perform. We have to deliver. We are always, to a huge extent, valued by our output. And that cannot be a healthy environment for people like these to thrive and to live a normal life. And so my invitation is to understand that there are other people out there to whom this narrative of be performing, be perfect, ask for the best, and, be strong doesn't really help. It is actually damaging. It pushes them away. We need to create narratives where we say it's okay to feel hurt. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. It's okay for you to relive that trauma and to have a hard time creating meaningful relationships or to have the courage to speak up. You might have people in your life that for decades have not spoken about their traumatic experiences, that have not even had the courage to investigate it, and have been going through unhealthy coping mechanisms in order to adapt and to feel accepted in this world. That is a huge tragedy, that we've reached that point that just for the sake of GDP, performance, and looking good on social media, we end up changing who we are because we know who we are will not truly be accepted by everyone else. And that is a shame. That is a huge shame that this is where we've come from. But I also believe we are doing a lot better than before, and that there is a chance for us right now. During this pandemic, most of us has had to stay alone with our own emotions and deal with it ourselves. And we've realized that, I can't self-coach myself out of this. I can't just read books on personal development and fine, I'm going to be good. We've all started to reach out and to realize there are certain emotional patterns that are pushing us in certain directions. And it gave us a moment for reflection. So I invite you to also reflect a little bit on the narratives that drive your company, that drive your groups of friends, and even the narratives that you are forming maybe in your family. It is time for us to make space for crying, for going through hard emotions, for feeling overwhelmed and not knowing what to do in a moment like that. And let us normalize not having to give people advice, to just let people express themselves and say, hey, you're going through a hard time. Just share what's happening on your mind. Just, I'm here. I'm here to listen. These type of things are important. But beyond that, it requires a fundamental restructuring of our society, because to a certain extent, all of what we do is structured around performance. There's always this obsession of measuring performance, measuring impact, and seeing that somehow through our productivity, we are valued as individuals. And here is where I invite us to reflect on how do we create a world in which we value people for the fact that they are human beings. And being a human being means that you have a lot of life experience that has taught you a great deal of things that you could share with others, that we all have common struggles that we can, coalesce around, and that we desire more than anything love and connection. That what really makes us come alive is not our pursuit of wealth, it is the pursuit of healthy and meaningful connection. And to reach a moment of healthy and meaningful connection, that requires vulnerability, that requires opening up. And in order for people to do that, we need to give them to make that first step ourselves. This is why storytelling is such a valuable tool, because if you, as an authority figure or as a figure of reference in your community, one day decide, hey guys, I want to open up about something, or I want to share a story with you guys, or I want to send out a message to my group of people, either through your social media or through a mass email, or better yet, in a face-to-face conversation. If you open up and talk about your own stories. And they don't have to be the most traumatic stories of your life, but slowly but surely opening about your struggles. That will invite others to do the same. And this is how that climate of safety, of authenticity will be formed. And it takes incremental steps. It doesn't have to be all of a sudden you shift everything on its head. But you start small, and the importance is to create consistency and to add more people to this movement. And beyond the idea, we need to acknowledge that when we create the space for this type of openness, it will benefit us as well. Not just the people that have gone through trauma. Regular people will benefit a great deal from this, because we also go through our life completely unexamined. We don't question why we feel in certain ways, why do we react in certain ways. People that have gone through traumatic experiences are very self-aware, and they're very knowledgeable about the fact that, well, the reason I have a hard time doing one thing or the other is because of this. And so they are more sensitive to their emotions. Most regular people are not. They don't really care because they don't see how important this can be and how damaging it can be for someone else who has had a more fragile mental or emotional structure and need a different type of environment in order to grow and become better. And some detractors might say, what is this? All of a sudden we have to create safe spaces for everybody and we have to tick a little and tick a little everyone else. No, that's not what I'm asking for. What I'm asking for is that if you want that person to be courageous, to be truly daring, you first need to give them an environment of safety. And once you create that environment of safety, they will build up that courage and they will become not just the fully fledged human beings that they can be. They can outnumber most of us in terms of, or outperform us in many, many different ways. All these people are valuable, and I hate using this word, but treasures and resources for our society. If we truly help them develop their potential, we will discover in them passionate doctors, passionate teachers, creators, artists, engineers, problem solvers. If we give them a voice, if we give them a platform to talk about the difficulties of the human experience, we will stop from, believing in this illusion that everything is perfect. We will accept the hardship of reality, and then we will stop pretending so much on social media and pretending to impress everybody with our perfect lives when we're actually suffering. And then we would all benefit from that, because we would end up stopping from running and trying to impress everybody to just being, you know what? I'm enough and I'm beautiful as I am. And if we send out that message to people who have gone through experiences like these, and we tell them it was not your fault, and it's okay to feel overwhelmed, but guess what? You are enough. You don't have to change in order to be accepted in this world. You are welcome, and we love you the way you are. That will change the world completely. It will change their lives, and that will encourage them to step out, to follow their passions, follow their skills, and to share that with the world. And their impact will be huge. It will be on us. It will be in their lives. And hopefully we break the circle, because it's quite unfortunate that most of the times trauma is passed on from generation to generation. And I believe this is time for us to break that cycle and to create new cycles of compassion, of empathy, of love, and solidarity. And one final thing that I can add, if you happen to be a human resource manager in that company, or the CEO and an entrepreneur, I encourage you to consider including therapy as an employment benefit for your employees. Because we are going to go through a lot more changes in the future that will stress us and test us emotionally. And in moments like these, people that have gone through trauma, that have not had the chance to speak about it, will have the hardest time to adapt and be understood. And we need to make space for that. And that is a good place to start. This way you normalize therapy in your organization. You set an example that you value the emotional health of your employees and that you are there to help them. We shouldn't wait for someone to commit suicide in an organization for us to take this seriously. We should take preventive steps. We should create environments where people can feel human and can feel that they are okay the way they are. Thank you very much for tuning in to this week's episode and to listening all the way through. I invite you to do your best and to listen to the useful tips and advices that I've done my best to share in this episode, and to start this conversation with people around you. If you have dealt with an experience like that yourself and you're still in the healing process, I feel you. It's a tough process, and I wish you all the best around that. Do make sure to ask for help. Find a therapist that can be there for you. Find friends that you can open up to, and give yourself time. Give yourself the patience, because it doesn't happen one day after the other. It's a grueling process. It tends to keep coming back, but in time, the process will bring and reap many, many rewards. I, for one, I am very grateful for the people in my life that have done that for me. And if you are one of those people that is actually listening right now, this thank you goes straightly to you. And I hope that you will be a person like that for someone in your life, because it will truly make a difference. You don't have to play the savior. You don't have to be our Superman. All you have to do is be a good friend, listen, and make space for us to be there and to feel welcome. See you again next week, where we're going to embark on more narratives that include people we've put aside in the past. And please share this with your friends, share it with your colleagues, share it with people that really need to hear this, because we can only make this a reality if we all work together and we all do our part. See you next week. Bye-bye.